So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to cover a little bit of information about something that we typically hear whenever we're around the country and around the world pertaining to pigs. But before we get started tonight, join me pretty much every time we have a webinar. You'll see a few new faces, but the two that have stuck with me through most of these here tonight with me is Marshall and Ryan. Marshall's going to be your trap support man that you talk to whenever you call in needing any assistance, and Ryan's the jack of all trades, handles a lot of our Facebook owners group, and definitely gets neck deep in a lot of our pig work all over the world. So what we're going to do tonight, my name is Aaron. For those of you that may be new to the webinars, I'm take care of the education, the research, and the outreach, and get the opportunity to get to travel the country and visit with you, a lot of you face to face, and getting to know a lot of you by name and face all over the country. So that's an absolute perk of the job. Tonight, what we're going to do, we're going to talk about, like I said, some of the things that we typically hear whenever we go around the country and around the world about pigs. And where we go, we hear a lot of times people say, you know what, my pigs are different. Whenever we get to those places, who knows where we're at, but it's one of those questions that keep coming up. So the way we typically start the event on these webinars, for those of you that may be new, is the way we have the Q&A set up there is, instead of having an open mic, we're going to have you use that Q&A or that chat feature. So if you look at the chat bar, it's either at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on what device you have. We'll ask you a question and you just respond to that question in that chat bar. That way or that chat feature, that way we know that you're aware of how to use that. And as we go through there, Ryan and Marshall is going to help me try to keep up with the questions that are coming in. So when we get to the end of the presentation, we'll stay here as long as need be to answer any and all of the questions that you have come in over the course of the event. So tonight's question, okay, folks, tonight's question with the topic that we're going to be talking about tonight, my pigs are different. Okay, tell me one of two things. What do you call the pigs where you're at? And remember, this is a family show, so keep it G-rated. Okay. The second thing, or you can tell me what makes your pigs different from the way you think pigs would, I guess if there was a standard, what the standard would be. So fill that out, put that in that chat. What do you call pigs in your part of the world? I know where I'm at in the eastern part of Texas, we got Pineywood rooters. We've got all kinds of different names that go along with the name of a wild pig. And then you get into some other parts of the country, they change a little bit. And unfortunately, sometimes there's some adjectives hung on them. But tell us what you would call your pigs in your part of the world, or what makes your pig different. What do you refer to your pig as whenever you're talking to people in the public? And definitely jump on that chat feature and fill that out for us. I see a couple of them coming in. So other things, what we're going to do tonight, like I said, we're going to come through work our way through this, and we're going to cover it as thoroughly as we can. We don't want to take more than 35 minutes of your time, and then allow how much time we need to answer questions at the end of it. So we can go a lot deeper, we can go a lot more in depth than what we want to do tonight, but it's one of those things we want to make sure that you get the information that you need in a timely fashion. If there's topics that we need to expound on, then definitely let us know. We can come back and visit that same topic again later, and definitely take it from a 101 or a 202 level up to a 303 or a 404 level. So basically what we'll do, get things kicked off. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to start off this afternoon is kind of give you an overview of what's coming in the next few months, the rest of the webinar series. You see there on June's date is going to be June the 22nd. Same time as we always hold these fourth Thursday events. June 22nd is going to be 8 o'clock Eastern time, 7 if you're where I'm at. Now where Brooke is in Nevada, it's going to be about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So June, we're going to talk about what pigs do in their transitional periods in that time, from going where we're at right now in late spring to that transitional period of early summer in June, July. So we're going to be talking about how those pigs are going to perform in that time of the year. But in June, the cool thing about June is you're going to get a 2-for-1. Okay, so we're going to cover the regular webinar on the fourth Thursday, which is June the 22nd. Now, the following week on June the 28th, definitely put this in ink. This is one you're going to want to attend. If you can't attend it, it's going to be just like all the other webinars out there. We're going to record it. You can come back and listen to it later, but it's going to be held a little bit different time on the June the 28th event. June 28th will be held at noon during the day Eastern time. The reason why we're having it at noon on that 28th date is because the speaker that day is going to be Dr. Carl Grimsey. Carl is the forefront of the pig effort regarding African swine fever in Germany. So he's going to talk to us about that African swine fever project in Germany and how Pig Brig is a major player in what they're doing in corralling and putting a handle on that African swine fever issue there in Germany. So that's going to be a very good one. But Carl is an unbelievable professional in the pig world, and he's going to have a ton of things that you're going to want to hear, particularly not just in addition to the disease aspect of it, but Germany only uses tree sets, folks. So we're not using post whenever we're talking about the Brig there. They're exclusively using the trap the way it was designed to be put on the trees and move it quickly throughout the landscape. So moving on into the discussion tonight. My pigs are different. So whenever we talk about this, why my pigs are different, I hear this, like I said, everywhere I go. Ryan hears it all over the world. Marshall hears it whenever he's out and about as well. Well, whenever you say different, whenever we talk about different, compared to what? What are we using as the baseline to compare our pigs to say our pigs are different? Okay, it could be that we're comparing the difference between feral, wild, and domestic. Because whenever you look at those three different words, they have three completely different definitions and three completely different demeanors when we think about pigs. So whenever we think about domestic's obviously what we see and know, those big lumbering giants, those slow growing animals that grow fast growing, fast growing, slower lumbering, slower moving animals that like to eat and lay down and get back up and eat again later. Whenever we take that domestic pig, though, we kick the gate open, we get tired of feeding those animals, we kick the gate up, let them go on their own. After about a month of those animals being able to live on their own without human involvement, we can then say that they're feral. So feral is just the term that we use to explain or to describe an animal that at one time lived as a domestic species. That's why we have feral donkeys and feral cattle and feral dogs and cats, things like that. At one time, they were a domestic species. Now, we transition that to wild. Wild is that species that is born as such. They're born wild, they've lived wild, they have never seen the inside of a stall or a pen or a paddock or anything of that nature. So whenever you get right down to it, a lot of what we see out there, upwards of 90%, is probably going to fit that wild definition. And as such, the reason behind what we see out there, there's been a lot of discussion in the past, the most recent past few years, is where do we transition maybe in the terms of what we used to describe the pigs that we have on the landscape? Are they still truly a feral species, or are they more of a wild species? But when are we talking about the difference in pigs compared to what? Okay, we do have them in three flavors out there on the landscape. Those three flavors, obviously, the Russian boar, the Eurasian boar, which is where the seed stock, if you want to call it that, comes from for a lot of our pigs that are here. We have the domestic swine, which is what we saw whenever the conquistadors and all those early settlers come over and brought those domestic pigs. Then we have the combination of the two, which is typically what we see today in our landscape across the United States, at least, is just you see some Russian boar that's still hanging on and some domestic swine influences that have been enhanced or have been skewed and changed one way or another by Mother Nature and natural selections. So whenever we hear people talk about my pigs are different, whenever we hear those definitions about, okay, well, explain to me what you mean by your pigs are different. Largely, the responses that we get are related to phenotypic traits. Whenever we mean by phenotypic traits, what's the physical appearance of the pig? My pigs are different. Okay, how so? Well, there's more white ones out there. Or it could be that every single one of them is black. We don't have any color variation in there. We could have some that are yellow, belted, so forth and so on. But what we hear all the time is particularly related to phenotypic stuff in one way or another. Color is going to be thrown in there. Other things that we hear people say is, well, mine's going to have that old long head, looks like a yard dart. Or mine's going to have a short little stubby blocky little head, and it's just that big bone lumbering giant. Other places we get to is just, man, my pigs are just the meanest things on the landscape. There's nothing out there that's meaner than my pigs. Well, I can tell you from looking at pigs across the planet, I haven't found one of them yet that I want to snuggle up on the couch with. So I think just by nature, they're going to be somewhat aggressive. Other people say, well, you know, mine are just unusually large. Unusually large compared to what? Are they unusually large? because there's a lot of domestic blood that could be in there that's causing that larger frame, that larger capacity? Or is it that you have some pigs that are in northern latitudes and you're comparing it to a southern latitude pig? And in that situation, you're perfectly on target. We're going to probably see some pigs that are a little bit larger by nature, just because of where they live. So what we're going to do to start off with this afternoon is we're going to start off talking about some of the scientific explanations of why your pigs may be a little bit different. Not to say that that people are wrong, or with the suggestions that we get that they're wrong, that your pigs are different, because if we start looking into the scientific explanations, your pigs could be extremely different from other people's pigs or pigs in other places because of a few things that we have there. First and foremost, we're going to take a trip back to 5th grade science. Whenever we think about that 5th grade science book, and for me, it might have been that I was a little slower learner, and it may have been the 8th grade science book. But if it was either way we go, it's going to be in those early educational years in the Punnett square. Whenever we think about that square, and you see it on the science boards, and they put it up there, and it always starts off with 4 little boxes in the square. Well, we put the capital letters across the top, we put the lowercase letters down the side, and we look in how those comparisons match up in the boxes as they work their way through that square. And what that does, that provides you with limitless comparisons in there. You can put in there comparisons on color, what the probability is that you're going to get certain color color combinations, or even you can put in there traits about what are the possibilities of it, my pigs being more aggressive or more dominant or more this or that than other pigs. So what that square allows us to do is scientifically look at dominant and recessive trait probabilities. So we can really get pretty close on a lot of things as we start working through that Punnett square and seeing what our possibilities could be. We'll talk more about these as we go through, but then we get on down to heterosis. Heterosis to us in the livestock fields or in some other places out there is what we call hybrid vigor. And what we see with hybrid vigor is whenever we take two species or the same species, but two different subspecies. So basically we see it a lot in livestock where you may have a cow, but then you have a crossbred operation where you have a bull that's different than the cow breed. And we put those together and we see that hybrid vigor. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And there are definitely some enhancements to crossbreeding operations that are out there, especially on the livestock aspect. But in the wild, whenever pigs are crossbreeding, we definitely see those hybrid vigor heterosis enhancements as well. The other thing that's on there is Bergmann's rule. Bergmann's rule is going to be based on the environment, and it explains a lot of things. And we'll get into that a lot deeper as we go through. But when we're going to start talking about crossbreeding operations or crossbreeding heterosis in wild pigs or the feral pig side of things, we need to keep in mind a couple of things with regard to heterosis as a uniformed comment across all species. So whenever we're thinking about heterosis, purebred lines, okay? Whenever you've got a purebred Angus or a purebred Hereford, or it could be a purebred Duroc or a Landrace or a Poland China, you're going to see uniformity. You're going to know whenever you have a litter on the way of those little pigs, they're going to look pretty consistent, or they should be pretty consistent no matter the situation. We're going to have that uniformity, but with purebred lines, we're going to see lower or smaller litters. So if you want to look, if you want to call them a purebred line, you look at the Russian boar, you look at European boar, you're going to see that as average on litter sizes, we're going to see about 3 pigs per litter. Whereas whenever you go into a crossbred lines, is what we see largely in the United States, that litter size is going to increase to 5, 6, 7 pigs. So those purebred lines, uniformity, smaller litters with a higher probability of genetic challenges as compared to those crossbred strains. So we'll get more probability of birth defects because sometimes in those purebred operations, those purebred strains, we get an absolute line breeding. And whenever we get those line breeding situations, we increase the probabilities of genetic challenges or compromises that we wouldn't see typically in crossbred lines, which whenever we talk about those crossbred lines, well, they have an increase in variability and increase in litter size. And the reason for that is we're crossing up 2 completely different breeds, different strains, whatever you want to term, and then you're going to see the benefits of each of those combinations, those 2 combinations coming together. We know pigs are social, folks. That's not a hidden fact, but it also holds true during reproduction, because out of all the pig litters that are out there in the wild, in those woods that you're trapping in, about 60% of feral pig litters have multiple sires. So whenever we start thinking about the 60% having multiple sires, we're going to have a ton of variability possibilities within that litter regarding color, structural traits, bone dementia, everything. So whenever you put that many sires that's had input into one litter, who knows what you're going to get? Roll the dice and see what turns up. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about some more of these issues. And now body structure. When we think about body structure, we got those domestic pigs that we were talking about earlier. Domestic pigs, you can take a 6-month pig with good genetics and so forth. You can put 280 pounds on a 6-month-old domestic pig pretty easily. Done it many times. And what you're going to see there is that those pigs obviously are much more efficient on food. They're much larger capacity, they're larger structure, they're larger framed, so forth and so on. So whenever we think about this, what does it tell us about Bergman's rule with the northern versus the southern pigs? Whenever we think about Bergman's rule, it's going to tell you the further north you go, the bigger body capacity that animal is going to have in order to stay alive. So the further north we go, we may see more of those domestic traits that try to hang on a little bit longer, or that it's natural selection in there to select for those pigs that are heavier bone, that are larger structured, because that larger body mass, that bigger frame body with the little shorter legs, a little stubbier ears, they're going to be able to hold thermal regulation. So where we have people tell me quite often, I get some folks say, well, pigs are not going to be able to handle those cold temperatures up north. Hold on a minute, folks. Where are we seeing the things, the comments out there in the media now about super pigs? Where's the origins of the super pig and all that? Canada is completely inundated with wild pigs, feral hogs right now, and they are living perfectly happy pig lives up there, and it fits the form of Bergman's rule perfectly. The further north you go, the bigger body capacities, the shorter legs, the shorter ears, and what that does, it allows less time for the blood to have contact with the body surface, which in cool temperature cool off that body temperature. As compared to southern pigs, you go into deep part of the South, you're going to find pigs that are much more structured. If you want to look at them like almost like a coyote, they have very fine bones. They have a gait where they don't lumber around like those bigger domestic strained pigs, those bigger northern pigs. They have more of a gait that they can get into, and they can travel very efficiently for long periods of time because they're not large bone, they're not large structured, they're not large frame. And the reason for that is because the further south you go, obviously you're going to get hot. You're going to want longer legs. You're going to want bigger ears. You're going to want a smaller, more tubular body that's going to allow that blood closer access to the surface of the body to stay cool. Other things out there too that's going to be beneficial for an animal like that in those slower or in those smaller framed animals is it doesn't take as much food to fill them up. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in specific as we work our way through there. Other issues that's going to influence my pigs being different is for years and years and years, the number one reason why pigs were covering as fast as they were is because of illegal transportation. Now, I'm talking about covering the country as fast as they were is like, how fast can a pig move north? About 75 miles an hour. That's going to be in the stock trailer behind the truck that's moving them in the middle of the night for hunting operations. And so genetic influxes or genetic inputs into new areas is just like if you were hauling a new bull into a crossbred cow operation. You're going to get a little bit of a genetic shot there that you didn't have in that those offspring, and you're going to see that influence of that in the generations or the years to come. Some people will say, okay, you know what, the head shape on my pigs are different. The body conformation is different, and you're dead on. You probably couldn't be any more correct. And what we're going to think about in there is how far are they displaced from the domestic strains? Because whenever we start thinking about those domestic strain pigs, do you see, if you put the domestic pig in your mind, put a Duroc or a Landrace or a Hampshire or whatever in your mind, what do you see whenever you see the head structure of that pig? Is it going to be your longer heads that are thin, or are they going to be short, blocky, typically like bulldozer type heads? And we're going to see the latter of the two. They're going to be a lot more compact, a lot more built for power, built for capacity than they are if you had a head of an animal that had to dig deep to get to the nutrition that they need, where that head would have to be structured much more like a chisel to get down to those tubers, those roots, things like that are a lot deeper. So we're looking now into the super pigs. This has been the big thing all over the media here recently, and say, man, the super pigs are gonna take over the world. Well, we need to kind of step back for a minute and recollect our thoughts on this and think about how are they defining that super pig. And whenever you get right back down to the basis of it, it is exactly nothing more than a crossbred pig. Okay, the super pigs that they're talking about are out of that Canadian area, that northern extremities area. And it's a lot of domestic swine that's crossbreeding with the existing feral pigs that's out there. And we're seeing the benefits of that hybrid vigor in those pigs. We're seeing pigs that don't look like what they typically have seen in the past in the wild strain. And they are dead on. My pigs are different. You're extremely right. So, but I would contest that the term super pigs could be used not just in Canada or those northern extremities. Super pigs are everywhere we have a wild pig at, because they do some phenomenal things, and it's unbelievable how those animals can adapt and how they can change so quickly to adapt to their environments. So those super pigs, kind of step back and think about this for a little bit before we start buying the Kool-Aid, and think where is this going to be something that can hold true. It can hold true everywhere that there's a pig hits the ground, because they're going to be largely crossbred pigs, and it's going to have super traits in some capacities. So next thing we're going to get into is, what does Mother Nature have to say about this deal? So Mother Nature is always going to hold the final gavel on what happens with regard to everything in nature. So what does she have to say about this? Well, one thing is going to be Mother Nature's regulatory authority is going to be carrying capacity. If we only have so much food out there in a given area, that carrying capacity is going to be something that's going to regulate pretty much everything on pigs. Okay, so carry capacity is going to affect, obviously, the abundance of what the land can carry. It's going to affect the nutritional availability and quality. It's going to affect soil structures, soil fertility, so forth and so on. Now, we get down to structure composition. And what we're talking about, structure composition, is the structure and the structural composition of the pigs themselves. Okay, so we think about the northern and southern pigs. We just talked about that with Bergman's rule. Bigger, slower growing, shorter legged, bigger eared, or smaller eared pigs rather, that's going to be there for thermal regulation, versus those southern pigs that are going to be built more for travel, more for the heat, that they can get the blood to the surface pretty quickly. But now we start thinking about structural composition, and you start comparing some of these. And this is a perfect example of where we can use the Punnett square at, is across one side there, you put north and south, and across the other side, you put arid and fertile, and we start mixing these animals up. So what could you find in a southern pig in arid environments? Probably one that's really slow growing, because in an arid environment, you're going to have limited food availability. So if you're a fast growing animal in the south in a hot environment, you're probably not going to live long. So we need some of those animals in the south in those arid environments. It's going to be a slower growing animal, a smaller framed animal that just doesn't need as much to stay alive. Whereas if you flip that script and you put a pig out there on the landscape that's going to be on the northern extremities, and it's going to be a highly fertile area, which could be like agriculture land that's very, very productive. Those northern pigs that are already prone to grow bigger just because of Bergman's rule, you put them in a fertile environment, man, you're talking about have some potential for some really, really big animals out there on the landscape. Whereas you tweak that just a bit and you say, okay, now we're going to say we got the northern pig that's in an arid environment. We go into the Dakotas or something like that. Not a lot to hide in up there. There's not a lot of food in the wintertime. So whenever you start thinking about northern pigs in arid environments, those dudes are going to have to be extremely tough, because they're going to have to take care of themselves exclusively. There's not much to hide in to stay warm in the wintertime. There's not much to eat on in the wintertime, and pigs don't hibernate. So when we think about those pigs in those areas, it's going to be a little bit slower to cover those areas with pig populations, just because of what Mother Nature says they can and can't do. So whenever we look at where we're at and where those scientific rulings fall into place, it's going to explain a lot. Disease limitations, or disease always is going to limit population in one way or another. So whenever we look at the factors that affect wildlife production or wildlife population management, we're going to see that the top two things that on the list that limit population growth in wildlife is, number one, disease. Number 2 is starvation. That's what limits population expansion and so forth. You may say, well, why does disease come before starvation? Well, if we think about as those animals age out, they start to get older in the structure of the dynamic there. Whenever they start to age out and they start to starve to death, because a lot of times those animals, that's what happens, is they're going to starve. And as they starve, what's going to happen to the immune system in their body? As that immune system starts to match that starvation and drops in efficiencies and how effective that immune system is on fighting disease back, disease is what actually comes in and takes the animal out. So as they start to starve, disease just leapfrogs starvation and goes ahead and takes care of that situation before starvation could. So keep those things in mind as you're moving forward with disease in the areas. Always remember that population is correlated is a relation to disease probability. So the lower the population densities, the lower probability you're going to have with disease in the area. Higher populations, disease probabilities are going to go up. So density is going to also equate to the size of the animal. All right, lower densities, typically there's going to be plenty of nutrition out there, and those lower densities, you'll see those animals growing quicker. They get a little bit bigger just because they don't have to hustle as much. The efficiencies of the pig is going to depend on, again, that population density, but it's also going to depend on the nutritional quality. If they've got a lot of quality nutrition with a lower density, you're going to see those animals perform a lot like domestic pigs, where they can go out and eat a lot of nutrition that's highly nutritious, and just go lay back down and turn pounds of nutrition into pounds of pork. So they don't have to work very much, and you'll see those efficiencies be or have influence over the litter sizes. Whenever we get into that next point there, and litter size is going to be influenced by the number of pigs on the landscape. If you already have population that's close to carrying capacity, typically those litter sizes are going to be smaller, much smaller, 2s, 3s, 4s, as comparable to populations that are a lot less dense, where you may have 5, 6s, 7s, and 8s in those litter sizes. The frequency of litters is also going to be influenced by the efficiencies and the size of the population in the area. More pigs, less food, more infrequent litters, where if you got less pigs, more food, you're going to have more frequent litters to occupy that space. And then obviously all of this is going to wrap up in a nice little bow there that's going to affect survivorship of those litters. It's going to affect survivorship of different age classifications of those pigs, because again too, as those pigs start to get old, they start to decrease in their efficiencies, their ability to stay up with the sounder, the ability to really go after the nutrition that they need, affecting those survivorships of those older age structured pigs. So whenever we get into the last thing that we really want to talk or discuss this tonight is some of those other observations that come out with descriptions of pigs being different. It's going to be based on regional variations. And a couple of these we had talked about earlier. One of these, at least, we talked about on that first slide. But some of the regional variations do exist. And we see this quite often with chewing. Some pigs are more prone to try to just bulldoze through things, where others are more prone to set back and actually chew their way through and use those big cutters to knife their way into places that they don't belong. So other places we have people that say, man, my pigs are just mean. They're just aggressive. I'm not disputing that, not one bit, because we can see in places that are more prone to hunting pigs with dogs, that those pigs have grown up needing to know how to fight. Well, if they need to know how to fight because of hunting and pushing those with dogs, yeah, you could probably have some animals that are passing on traits that are a little bit more probable for aggression. Other things that's going to be out there that's going to enhance aggression too is if you have a high population density in the area, and those pigs just naturally have to fight for food, you may see those aggressions go up. Where if you got a low population, low pressure, things of that nature, you'd rather have that little cheese puff out there would rather run off than he would stand his ground and fight anything. So keep those things in mind there. Other thing is going to be that's going to have some regional preferences is food preference, or regional variations is food preference. Whenever you get out there and you got plenty of food on the landscape, they're going to select for certain things to feed on. You're going to also see then those food preferences and what we see when we bait traps, when we're trying to bait in pigs, trying to draw them in, attract them in. Sometimes it's very, very good that if you have pigs that know what peanuts are, put your little peanut oil into your bait, and it'll draw those pigs in maybe a little bit better than it would just with your dry corn. But if you try to go with that same approach in areas that doesn't have peanuts, for example, you may push those pigs back because they just don't know what that food is. It's going to take a little while for them to acclimate to what you're trying to feed them. Other things out there that's going to be something that's a little bit different, other observations, is nutrition and mineral availability are directly correlated to size. Okay, so that's the size of the animal. They got the food, but they still got to have the minerals and the nutrition, the composition of that. So what we want to look at there is think about your soil type. If you got more of a sandy type soil, what's your typical nutritional quality going to be on a deep sugar sand type strata? It's not very good. Whereas if you compare that to a deep sandy loam that's pretty substantial organic matter, got some holding ability for some minerals in there, the nutrition that's growing above that's probably going to be pretty dang good, and the pigs are going to benefit from that. So soil type does have an effect on what your pigs are going to look like, how they're going to grow out, how they're going to perform. Vegetation composition is going to have a heavy influence on there. Obviously, they're going to go after the ice cream first, and if ice cream is all that's out there, you're going to have pigs that's going to respond appropriately. But whenever they start to see that vegetation composition shift, and we'll start seeing that shifting within the next probably 6 weeks from that spring flush of extremely good nutrition to that more rough, rigid, lignin-based vegetation that's out there in the summertime. Whenever we see that, we're going to see a change in those pigs and how they perform, what they respond to, just because of that vegetation composition and the nutritional qualities that follow that composition. The other thing that's going to be there is the distance between resources. Whenever we have pigs that are in landscapes that have everything they need within a short distance, they're going to do extremely well. They don't have to get up. They don't have to expend any energy, excessive energy anyway, to make sure that they survive and do what they need to do. Whereas you compare that to what you may find in deep South Texas or New Mexico, some of those places like that it may be a substantial distance between resources. They have to go a certain place to feed. Then they have to literally change directions and go miles before they can find a water source. So in that situation, distance between resources is going to have a heavy influence on what those pigs do and how they perform. Other things out there is going to obviously be, is your land agriculture based, wild land? It's agriculture based. We definitely need to have that land being of high productivity and high efficiencies, because we're demanding things from that land. And what I tell people all the time when we go there is you're going to be a direct beneficiary of that land. Your livestock is going to be a direct beneficiary of your good management. But what is going to be an indirect beneficiary of your good management? It's going to be a pig. So if you're doing extremely good and you got fat calves that are weaning off heavy, then you're probably going to have large litters that are going to be weaning off fat off of those sows as well. So if you're a good land manager for desirable species, you're going to also have some happy pigs on the landscape that's probably going to be doing pretty well. So as opposed to wild land, and those pigs really have to get out there and hustle, really have to get out there and fight for what they have. They're going to be a little slower growing, a little bit less responsive to environmental shifts and so forth as they would in regards to agriculture plantings and the like. So with that, folks, that's going to wrap up pretty much the slides of what we wanted to go through tonight. We've covered about 35 minutes or so of some topic, and that's where we typically like to hold things to. This is just going to remind you again, too, of what's coming up in June. That's in June, July, August, through the summer months. And same time, fourth Thursday of the month, let's see, what is it, 6 o'clock on the East Coast, 7 where I'm at here in Texas. And then out there where Brooks at in Nevada is going to be about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But definitely put it on your calendars, and you'll be seeing Pig Brig information coming out on it too. That's already a little bit out there now about Dr. Carl Grimsey's webinar that's going to be on June the 28th at noon. And again, I know if some of you are working during the day that day, then we're going to record it. You can listen to it later. But for those of y'all that are land and wildlife managers as a profession, let your colleagues know. Let them join us. Come join us that day for that event, and there's no doubt you're going to walk away with something new. This is something that I'm really looking forward to myself, and I think all the rest of the Pig Brig team is as well. So with that, we're going to open this back up, and now this is the time that we've got. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, plug those into that chat feature up there at the top. Me, Ryan, Marshall, we're going to be monitoring that and answering your questions as we go. But before we start answering those questions, this one I want to turn it over to Ryan and Marshall. Is there anything else we need to add on here that I've just absolutely avoided?
Not on my end. You did pretty good there, boss. Yeah, you did good.
Anything else we need to add on this, guys? Y'all keep the questions coming, because that's what we're going to be here until y'all run out of questions. I don't know if the questions are slow to come or we answered all the questions. I see some things changing, but
How do we see previous webinars?
good question. You can go to our Brig website, purebred.com, and go to the webinars there. You'll see all the recordings that are listed there on the Brig website. Download any or all of them. Use them where you think you want to use them. Share them with your friends. But everything is included on the purebred.com website.
And some of them are on YouTube as well.
Yes, definite. Good point, Marshall. And if y'all have anything that y'all see in the lineup that we've covered since what 15 months or so ago, and compare that to the list that we've got coming forward, if you don't see a topic that you think we need to address, definitely let us know and it'll get put into the queue.
Yeah, guys, if all right, where can we get the swine flu to turn loose here? We don't want that here.
Yeah, we don't want that. So yeah, that's one of those things that I've had some questions, but in the past been posed to me is, why don't we release the swine flu, because it'll kill the wild pigs. Well, one of the things that kill the domestics too. The other thing about diseases out there is, no matter what the disease is that's out there on the landscape, they're not 100% effective. So whenever you start thinking about producing a super pig, the disease resistance of certain individuals in a species is what's going to produce a super animal. So in any of the diseases that are out there, you're never going to run more than about 96-97% mortality. Yeah, you're only left with 4 or 5 pigs that's left out of that were resistant to that disease. But the thing is the resistant pigs are going to be what's breeding moving forward. And then whenever you start having those resistant pigs breeding moving forward, then you truly have created a super pig that then there's nothing going to affect. So that's one of the questions that's definitely come up over my career, is why don't we fight pig with disease? That's why. We'd literally create a super pig.
Sorry. I'll take this one. Will bright flashing solar lights deter? They will to start with, but once the pigs realize that there's no danger at those lights, it will lose its effectiveness of keeping them away.
Yeah, quickly. Yeah, pigs are smart, folks. They're going to get acclimated to it pretty quickly. Any other questions?
Guys, if y'all have questions for Aaron or Ryan and myself for trap support questions, ask away.
Yeah, this is just doesn't have to be specific to the event we covered tonight. I mean, anything that you've got right here, definitely bring it to the table. I'm running through here too, Marshall.
Resources for removal. Trapping is your most effective means of population control. If that's what you're asking. And then typically what you want to do is run a trapping effort first, trap as many pigs as you can. Then you want to look at following that up with maybe some thermal, and then in the end to do final cleanup of small numbers. And we're talking single digits, maybe 1 to 5. That's when you would come in with your dogs.
The thing that you need to think about with your pig management is you have to be adaptive. So there's no yellow brick road for pig management. What you're going to have to do in agriculture and livestock, we call it integrated pest management, because a lot of times we can put it on a calendar and say it's going to happen at a certain time in a certain way. When we talk about wildlife, we have to use the word adaptive, because Mother Nature is going to throw curves all the time. So to say that you're going to do something on your property that's going to be managing pigs, and that may be completely effective in doing that. Ryan, I may do it on my property, and Ryan's across the fence from me, his management approach may look completely different. So you're going to have to adapt your management. But yes, no matter where you go around the planet, the research, the foundation of pig management research indicates every single time is based on trapping. So we go in and we knock those numbers down, those big numbers down with traps. And then you go in, like Marshall said, depending on what the legal availabilities are in your area, and is what you can adapt into that management strategy.
All right, we've got, how often should the traps be moved across the landscape, and what determines when you move?
Well, that's going to be depending on what the pigs tell us that we need to do. If a trap continues to be productive in the area that you have it, there really isn't a reason to move it. One of the things that we need to think about is that how long you trap in duration. And what I mean by that is if you start trapping pigs on the 1st of the month, is how long do you go after those pigs before you back off? And there is a statistical number there that you need to think about, because this is another one of those deals that we talked about a couple of webinars ago, is that if you stay after pigs, the statistical break in efficiencies on pigs is after night 5. Okay, so if you catch pigs tonight, you stay after them for the next 4 nights, and then you back away from them, because a couple of things are going to happen in that situation. Is after night 5, you may have already caught them all. You may have already caught them all after night 2. But if you haven't caught all of them after night 5, statistically, what you're going to be doing at that point, from that point on, is educating what's left over. So whenever I go out there, I'm going to treat trapping pigs much like a boxing match, and I want to hit them quick, knock them off balance, and get back from them before they even realize what happened. And then I'll give them a couple of weeks of I guess to reassociate, whatever you want to call it, and then I'm going to come and hit them again. So whenever I hit them first, hit them quick, catch them for a few nights, back away. But when I back away, I'm going to lift those nets back up and feed that trap one more time. And the reason I feed that trap one more time as I'm backing away is those pigs that I did not catch that may still be in that area, the last memory they have of that trap site is a free meal. And what that's going to help you do is shorten the time of your conditioning when you go back to conditioning again, because those pigs had a positive memory at that trap site. So your conditioning period will be shorter as such. They don't have to worry about things going wrong. They had a free meal. Everybody was good. So whenever I start thinking about moving traps across the landscape, I'm thinking about how big is the landscape I'm working on. If I'm working on 500 acres, I'm probably not going to move it at all. If I'm working on 1,000 acres, I may move it from one corner to the other, or so forth and so on. And that's going to be dictated on where the food resources are that the pigs are following. It's going to also be directly related to where is the reproduction cycle at on those pigs, because if they're actively breeding in the breeding process, they're going to be in completely different travel patterns than they would if those sows were heavy bred or they had pigs on side. They don't want nothing to do with the boars. They're going to travel different. So it's going to depend on so many different variables that we need to ask questions before we can answer that question for you. Is that how often do we change? I may have to ask you 4 or 5 questions before we can give you an accurate answer, because if somebody tells you 100% this is what you need to do, you need to close the ears off. There is no cookie cutter report that they can give you to say this is what you can do to the letter and you're going to be successful. Just doesn't happen.
I'll add in one thing there, Aaron. The other thing that is really strong consideration is the seasonality, right? There's 2 times a year when trapping's really slow. And if you're going to trap during that time of year, the likelihood of you catching all the pigs in your area are pretty low. That's that green flush out that Aaron was talking about in the spring. And then when your mass crops start to drop and you're having your agricultural commodity crops harvested in the later fall, those 2 times are really hard to trap pigs. So if you're gonna grind through it, it's going to be a longer process than when resources are more limiting late summer and then the depths of the winter. You know, your trap durations are much shorter than those time frames because you have more efficiency with the use of your baiting materials.
Right. Excellent. And yeah, and then that could also too, Ryan, we had talked about this in a webinar sometime back too, that at those lull periods like that slack off in efficiencies, that may be a perfect opportunity to back away from those pigs a little bit too, because the more we push them during those less than optimal trapping times, sometimes we educate them. And then at your optimal times of the year to trap, you're not as efficient because you've taught them what to do. You taught them what your strategies are, and those pigs don't forget. So they're pretty mindful. Let's see here. I had a couple of questions come in. It says, what are the facts on eating the hogs we shoot? All right. Hey, I'll tell you what, folks, if you check in my freezer, you're going to probably find some wild pig in my freezer. I'm not going to tell you probably, you are. All right. The thing that we need to keep in mind on the eating the pigs that we shoot is that food, I guess, food safety. And whenever we talk about food safety, it's directly related to the temperature that you cook your meat. So whenever we're cooking pork, we don't eat it like sushi. We want pork cooked to 160 degrees internal temperature for a few minutes to kill everything that's in there. Nothing less than an internal temperature of 160 degrees. If you're going to eat those pigs, that's the rule of thumb right there. The one thing about eating pigs that wild pigs out there, the CDC, I mean, Center for Disease Control, USDA, they've both done the work. They've looked at it, and they cannot trace it back to a single infection coming from eating wild pork that is properly cooked. The concern that we have in disease transmission from a wild pig to humans is during the handling process after that animal has been dispatched. So if you got cuts on your hands, you got you're singing your favorite song, your mouth's open or whatever else, and you get some blood spray in your face, your mouth, and your cut hands or whatnot, there's a disease transmission possibility there. And it's not one of those things I'm going to tell you to lose a lot of sleep on. It's just something you need to be mindful of. So if you're going to shoot a pig and you want to use that for barbecue material over Memorial Day weekend, man, invite me, I'll be there. But we're going to have to make sure that it's going to be cooked right and enjoy that pig that you've got there on the pit. Other thing, let me see if I can find what was coming in here. Okay, let's see.
Ryan, I'll send this one over to Ryan. What is the easiest way to straighten the ground stakes?
Yeah, I saw that from William, and probably the easiest way is left in the ground. What I would probably do is if I didn't have the strength to be able to straighten it out, I'd probably try to get a bar in there, maybe with a hook on the end, put it basically through that top, and then kind of lever it over. So, basically some sort of bar with two notches in it, put it on there, but leaving it in the ground, don't pull it out of the ground to try to straighten it. It's much easier when they're in the ground, and if you have to, then you always take it and just put it in a big vise on a bench somewhere. At least that's what I do.
Hey, and then Ryan, I've got one I'm going to throw your way too that's going to say in that same thread about those rods is it says, what is the proper steps to measure where the T-post should be placed after the first post is placed? Your measuring strap.
Yeah. So
once where the T-post should be placed after the first post is placed.
Yeah, you just hook. Well, we've got a bunch of videos on that on the website, but the easiest way is to just take and hook the hooked into your cam strap or hooked into your measuring strap. It's pinned in the center. You've got your hook on the first T-post. You pull that D-ring tight, and where that D-ring lays, you put your T-post right in the middle of that D-ring. And that'll end up being 6 foot 1 3/4 inches from the other T-post.
Yeah, and with the way that measuring strap is arranged, you don't have to worry about taking that tape measure with you. So, and then whenever you hang your net on your post, the hog rings on the top rope are going to match up exactly where those T-posts are driven.
Yeah. One other thing I would say, and I probably should have mentioned this, is we also do offer those heavy duty anchor stakes that can be purchased on the website. And if it's truly an issue to try to get them straightened out, those heavy duty anchor stakes, they're going to be a burden to carry into the trap because they're heavy, but they tend not to bend. So that's less of a concern.
Yeah, and if a pig hits it hard enough to bend it, he'll be stuck to it when you get there in the morning.
Any other questions?
Yeah, it looks like there's one that came in from a Zoom user. It says, what is the usual advice for transitioning from spring to summer with controlling numbers of pigs? Crops are growing taller, limiting visibility for hunting, etc.
Yeah, that's a good question because where I'm at right now, we're getting, the corn is already extremely far along. We're even getting to some of the places there where the doe stage may already start to be in these early days. So I know where you're coming from on that. What we need to think about there is that once that doe really starts to set in those summertime crops, it's going to be tough trapping. And the reason it's tough trapping is there all those sugars that are collecting in that grain and in that crop that's growing is going to give them so much food. So if it hasn't got to that stage now, you need to get on those pigs quickly, because once it transitions into that doe stage and all that out there, you're going to be fighting with trying to bait, just like baiting kids in with, and that's got an ice cream truck in front of them and you're trying to feed them green beans. It's just not going to work. Okay. So right now, what you need to be thinking about is some of those pigs are going to be starting to scout those fields, and you'll see a lot of lone tracks out there. Some, yeah, you may be looking at boar tracks, but a lot of them are going to be those animals out there just cruising crops, checking to see where they're at. You'll see some of those corn crops, some of those other crops out there that you may see one or two ears that's ripped down, and they're checking those ears, or you can see a little bit of nose action in the ground where some of that other crop is at. They're checking things out. The rest of the sounder is close, folks. So what you need to think about is get into those fence lines, those travel corridors around those around those fields, and start trapping the heck out of them. So yeah, you got your crops high and your thermals are not working. Your aerial gunning is almost going to be nil because of the cover. But you're also too running out of time to be able to get to those pigs before the doe sets. So get out and start really working on those animals heavy. They're going to be getting closer and closer to the field edges, where just like they did whenever it was planting season. The closer it gets to planting season, the closer those pigs associate with those crop fields while the grain's going in the ground. After that planting season is passed, until it gets to the doe stage, they'll flare back out, go back to somewhat of their patterns that would have been somewhat normal, if you want to call it that. Now, as we start getting to the transitioning into that doe stage, especially on the southern part of the United States, we're going to see those pigs start getting closer to those fields again. So yeah, further north of where Ryan's at and all that up there, that corn is nowhere near close to what we are here. So you've got a little bit more time to work those pigs into the areas that they may be back in the timber and some more CRP type land or something like that. Where me and Marshall's at, you need to work on those animals with the traps right now, and then think about that once those pigs start really hammering that crop. The more you push them, the more you fight with them, the more you're going to educate them. It's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but
there's a couple more comments in here. There's a link to the post on the video that I did. I guess it was probably 2 years back now, about straightening the anchor stakes. There's a link to that in the chat function there, so you can search that. And then Nicole posted that they straighten theirs out with a receiver hitch of their truck, stick it in there, and use the receiver to straighten them. I think I mentioned that in the video too. And then Gordon mentioned he uses a pipe wrench. He's probably got one of them 3-footers that the commercial guys use, but he basically puts it on there sideways. It sounds like he opens up the jaw pretty good, and then just uses the leverage of the pipe wrench. So one of the beauties of having these forums is that we get to learn a little something too. I haven't thought of the pipe wrench trick, so that's a good one to keep in your back pocket.
Oh yeah.
right.
We got one. How long should conditioning typically take?
Okay, that's a good one that comes up quite often. We talked about that today. I was in Louisiana doing a field day there, and that question come up a couple of different times there in different forms. But the thing is with conditioning, the way that we suggest you approach that whole process. Number one, for me, conditioning is by far the most important process in the trapping effort. If you don't get the conditioning right, you will not be as effective as what you need to be. So whenever we start to condition pigs, and whenever we get a pig brig set up in an area, it's a new trap location, it's a new setup. Obviously, the pigs are going to notice something new is in the area. Typically, where we start out wrong or off the wrong foot is that we get that trap set up and we immediately start conditioning those pigs inside the perimeter of that trap. So whenever we put the traps up, we start the conditioning process with about 90% of the bait on the outside of the trap, 10% on the inside of the trap. What we're wanting to do in the early stages of conditioning is we want to introduce those pigs to that trap. Okay. If we try to force them into an area that they're shy of, you could push them back completely. So whenever I say the early stages of that conditioning phase, that could only be a day. So if we put the 90% of the bait on the outside of that trap on the first day, and we get there the second day to check that trap, and they've eaten 90% on the outside and all 10% on the inside, then we're going to put 100% of that conditioning bait on the inside of that trap. Whereas on the flip side, if we get there and those pigs are more shy, they've been pressured hard, it may take you 2 weeks to get those pigs to feed under that net the first time. So the conditioning length is going to depend a lot on what the pressure has been on those pigs in the past. So typically we tell you it's going to be give or take a week. So whenever I say give or take either side of a week. So if you got pigs, and the way I'll ask people is are you seeing your pigs in the daytime? If I'm seeing pigs in the daytime, that's a pretty good indicator to me that those pigs are not heavily pressured. Those pigs are happy. They're doing their pig life, their pig thing. They're probably going to respond pretty quickly to bait, to traps, to things like that, and be more suited to give you the results that you want. Whereas if you never see pigs at all, except from midnight to 3 in the morning on a game camera in the deepest, darkest part of the woods, those animals have probably been pressured pretty hard for quite some time. They're probably going to be slower to condition just because they've seen everything in the book. So you're going to have to convince them. So the main thing in the conditioning period is stay patient. Okay. Conditioning is going to be dictated. The length of conditioning is going to be dictated solely on the pig response, not on what the calendar says or what you got on your to-do list. So if you start putting it on a calendar or based off your to-do list, we're not going to be as efficient as what we need to be. So I'd like to tell you, yeah, you're going to need to condition 4, 5, 6 days, but we just don't know. Are you seeing pigs in the daytime? Are you seeing them in the middle of the night only on a game camera? That'll give you a pretty good indication of how quick they're going to respond.
And for those super wily pigs, make sure you're using the leverage of the least resources in the environment, right? That's really
You're
when
right.
you want to focus on that late summertime and the deepest, hardest part of the winter, right? You're going to have much more success at those 2 times a year. And if you have pigs that are that wary, you're not catching those in the spring, and you're not catching them in the fall when there's plenty of resources available. You're just not going to be able to do it.
No, the other thing to think about too is that, I mean, we can't go back and stress the point about being patient enough, is that a lot of times we get impatient because pigs aren't responding. So we start trying to throw additives and attractants at them to be able to get them to come in. Well, if they're not responding, you've got to figure out why they're not responding first before you start trying to change up a recipe. Because if we don't know why they're not responding and you start changing up recipes and throwing everything at them in additives and attractants, you can make the situation worse and push them further back. So be patient, set back for just a minute, take a deep breath and look at the situation you're facing and find out, why are they not responding the way I want them to in the first place? And it could be just like what Ryan said. We may need to completely back away from them and wait till those peak times of the year where their wariness is decreased.
All right. When pigs have left the area, how soon should you expect them to return? Haven't seen pigs for 10 months.
Okay, I talked to a guy this morning in Southeast Louisiana that trapped pigs, and he trapped a pretty large number off of his property 2 years ago, and he just saw pigs again this month. Okay, so how long it's going to take is going to depend on what the resources are in the area that's surrounding your property. Because what's going to happen is, say if you got a 500-acre block and you have pigs removed completely off that 500-acre block, the nutrition availability and quality is going to increase quickly just because of those mouths being gone. Okay, if the surrounding area outside of that 500-acre block is in decreased nutrition availability and quality, you're going to have pigs recover your 500 acres quickly. But if your 500 acres more closely matches what the resources are outside of your 500 acres, they may not come back for a very long period of time just because there's no need to. They have what they need in other places. I trapped a big property October a year ago is when we started, and between October and December, we caught around 900 pigs off of 22,000 acres. And the landowner there did not see numbers more than 1 or 2 here or there for almost 6 months. And he said literally almost overnight, they recovered that whole 22,000 acre ranch. So I'm sure it took a little bit longer than just overnight, but it's just one of those things that I don't know that you can really put a timeline on it without looking at the resource availability, not just on your property, but what is the resource availability and quality on the surrounding properties as well.
I think to add to that, Aaron, the management that's going on outside your property also has an
Absolutely.
impact, right? You know, if you're running a Brig and all three of your neighbors are running a Brig or another trap system, or they're running them with a dog, right? If they're blowing up the sounders and they're in the next county
Right.
because they're getting pressured hard, they'll be back. It's just, it's going to take a while. And like I said, it's going to happen in the middle of the night because they're smart.
Yeah, you blow them out. If you blow them out and get rid of them, yeah, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. You're going to have a little bit of a reprieve, but whenever it comes back, it's going to come back bigger than it was when it left.
Should I rinse the trap off before moving to a new area, or is it okay to move it to a few different locations before rinsing the net off?
Well, I guess it's going to depend on what you're trying to rinse off. If you've been out there using a 12 gauge to shoot pigs in a trap, then yeah, you may have to rinse that net off a little bit. But if you've been catching pigs and you've got the smell of pigs on that trap, then I wouldn't rinse it at all. I mean, I may go for a very long period of time without washing the trap because it just smells like pigs. So whenever I move that trap into a new area, it's just like if we were to move anything else new into an area, they're going to be, they'll know by smell that something's changed. So just the curiosity of what the new pig smell is in an area may be something that can actually kickstart some of your visitation to your trap. So I think the other thing to think about though is if you've got mud clods or something like that that's on your trap, yeah, probably in that transitional phase that you're going from one point to another, go ahead and rinse that trap off. But if you're rinsing it off, cleaning that trap, remember, do not use heavy detergents on that trap because we don't want to compromise the UV coating that's on that net. So if you're going to wash that trap, you can use a pressure washer, go down to the car wash and use the washer at the car wash, use your garden hose, whatever you want to use, but don't use detergents on that net. But if it just smells like pigs, I'm not rinsing the net.
Yeah, just to add to that, when I bounce from property to property, the only thing that washes my nets is the rain.
Yeah, I'm not going to spend my time. It smells too much like a pig, and that's what I want to be catching in it anyway.
Ed asked, is there a book of how to?
Yeah, Ed, there's a lot of books with how to out there. The thing that I would be cautious in there too is that research the author before you buy the book. Okay. Because there is a ton, I mean, literally train loads of pseudoscience out there surrounding pigs. And what some people believe is the proverbial gospel on pigs is nothing but a myth. So make sure that you research the author, make sure that it's a reputable source, and always, no matter if you're reading it out of a research journal, read it with a mind of they have to prove it to you. Don't just take the Kool-Aid and run with it. That if they make a claim, they've got to be able to back up that claim and support what they're writing about. And just so don't take it and think that's the fact and be done with it. But yeah, there's a ton of books. I'd just be cautious.
There's even better one. It's a phone number. It's the 833-744-2744.
That's it. Yeah. So the only resource book you really need is Pig Brig. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of biased, but yeah, we'll be glad to work with anybody on anything. It doesn't matter if you're calling in and you ain't a Pig Brig owner yet, then we still work. We'd be glad to work with you.
I think the other thing to think about is that make sure that the information that you're getting is research based, right? It's
exactly.
not opinion, it's research based. That's
right.
That's what we key in on, what the latest
Ed, one of the
research is
things
telling us.
Yeah, Ed, one of the things I'll tell you whenever I go in and I start trying to figure out if there's any validity to number one, the author, and number two, the content they're writing about, is don't do your typical Google search. Whenever you get to your Google search bar, type in Google Scholar and go to a completely different site. Because when you go to that Google Scholar site, the only thing that can be posted on that Google Scholar site is research-backed information. Period. Applied, lengthy research that has to go through the scrutiny of analysis, statistics, everything. So you can put a lot more trust in what you're seeing if you're going to that Scholar website or that Scholar search engine.
There's an outdoors radio show in Jacksonville, Florida that is big time Pig Brig supporter. ex-NFL player has one on his property.
Cool.
Gordon, who is that? We'd love to be able to listen in on that podcast or that radio show.
And Gordon, just keep in mind, if you're in Florida, let us know where you're at, or we can look you up. And because I'll be in Florida a few times in the coming months. May come by and check out the trap and chat pigs.
Jeff Legman Outdoor Show 1010XL.
Cool.
Yeah, we'll have to check that out. How about working with a World Series champ? Who would that be? Oh, Chipper Jones? Oh yeah, I'd love to
Oh,
work
now
with
we're
Chipper
talking
Jones.
Braves. I don't know about that. I'm in the Astros world over here. I don't know if we can work on that.
I'd love to work with Chipper Jones.
I figured you would, you traitor.
I've been a Braves fan since I could bite ankles.
I know, and we can smell it on you. Yeah. So, yeah, be glad to send Chipper our way.
Yeah,
We gotta
absolutely.
have somebody to wash traps. Good to know, folks. Anything else? If nothing, folks, then y'all enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. Please stay safe. Put as many pigs on the barbecue pit as you can. Enjoy your family.
Absolutely.
Thank you everyone for coming out this evening. Certainly appreciate it.
Appreciate it, folks. We're gonna go ahead and hit the gavel on this one and close it up. Y'all have a good afternoon and good weekend.